Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is more of a reminder than it is necessarily new information. I think by this time, most people are going to be somewhat acquainted with what I'm saying or somewhat familiar with what I'm saying. Um, this book right here, New Jim Crow, for those of you that have never read it, definitely, definitely, definitely read this book. In this book, the author, Michelle Alexander, who was a former law professor at The Ohio State University, she outlines the history of racism. She outlines the different era of racist tactics and racism and uh, how it was used, how it was maintained, how it was kept alive. So she talks about in the book. She starts with slavery, obviously, and then from slavery she goes to the black codes and black laws, and then from there she goes from Jim Crow or to Jim Crow, and that time span, that era, and everything that Jim Crow entailed. And then she went from that to mass incarceration, which is what the book is about. Mass incarceration. I hope that the title isn't backwards because it looks backwards on my screen. But the name of the book is The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness by Michelle Alexander. So from mass incarceration, we have a new phenomenon called ecarceration. And ecarceration is basically, and this is not the topic of really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is going to be rather short. But like I said, it's more of a reminder than it is new information. Ecarceration is basically where they let prisoners out of prison, or instead of incarcerating individuals in physical prisons, they put them on the box. They put them on ankle monitors. With that ankle monitor, they will go into the computer, they will draw a perimeter, and that person cannot come outside of that perimeter. If they come outside that perimeter, it will alert law enforcement. Law enforcement will come get you. In essence, basically making neighborhoods where people live open air prisons. You're not in a physical prison, you're in an electronic prison, ecarceration. And that's becoming more and more prominent with the court systems. But that speaks to what she talks about in the book, in that racism and systemic racism, in particular, systemic oppression, basically does not end, it does not necessarily lessen, but what it does is it changes to meet and match the time and era that the people happen to live in. So there has been this large push to fight against mass incarceration, which took place under what's his name, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and that whole crew. But there's a large scale movement to address mass incarceration. Oftentimes, people who are incorporated, in particular, black people. Notice I didn't use the term people of color, but I'll save that for another video. But in particular, black people oftentimes are incarcerated for low-level drug offenses. So they'll be locked in prison with murderers, gangbangers, serial killers, rapists, kidnappers, bank robbers, because they got caught with a joint, or they got caught with a nickel bag of weed or a dime bag of weed. And, most of us are familiar with the outcome of mass incarceration as far as the destruction to the black community, the destruction of the black family what mass incarceration actually did. Like I said, e-carceration is now the new tactic. How she outlines the morphing of systemic oppression and its tactics is legendary. It's legendary. I say that to say what? Those people who are a part of the system, that part of the system that supports and maintains the status quo, meaning white supremacy and everyone else under the boot heel of those who are of European descent. Oftentimes, what you'll find, what they use as a tactic, is they will commandeer. They will commandeer something that black people use as a tool to clarify or shed light on or explain an aspect of systemic oppression and white supremacy. They will commandeer it and they will redefine it. They will turn it into, or not turn it into rather, but it'll have, when they use it, it'll be dog whistle. It'll have a dog whistle effect. Dog whistle meaning they're saying one thing, but it actually means something else. But the people who know what it means are a sort of a select few. Sort of a select few. It's kind of, they're saying now, or it has been said, that the word felon is the new N-word. So they can't call you the N-word now, but now they'll call you a felon. And in their circles and amongst their people, they know that they actually mean not a person who has necessarily committed a crime and gone to prison, but the N-word. Words are commandeered and redefined. And that's one of the ways that white supremacy and systemic oppression is kept alive, by making sure that it is applicable and elusive to the people who oppose it of a particular era of time. For quite a while, well, recently, the biggest threat to American society, to children, to democracy, and to everything that this country holds dear was critical race theory. Critical race theory was on the tip of the tongue of every racist, every conservative news outlet. They, everything was CRT, critical race theory, So then to the point to where people who were not very educated would then cling to that word and use it. But if you ask them to define, what is critical race theory? Who are the founders of critical race theory? What was the purpose of the point of critical race theory? They obviously had zero knowledge and could not explain it. So they were against something and wanted to eradicate and destroy something, and swore up and down that it was against them, although they couldn't define it and they really didn't know what it was and had never really studied it. Because, as you know, if you've ever studied critical race theory, critical race theory is really only taught in detail at the advanced or graduate level, your master's degree, PhD, and law schools. It's not taught in high schools. It's not taught in elementary schools. It's not taught in preschool. It is an advanced study. I only became familiar with it in undergrad through a rudimentary explanation of what it was. This is what it is. But you didn't get too deep into it until I went into my master's degree. And now I'm using it for my theoretical framework for my PhD. But that word was commandeered. That word was on the tongue of every conservative That word was on the tongue of everyone who was anti-black and who wanted to, again, maintain status quo. So, do you hear critical race theory anymore? Ask yourself that. You don't hear critical race theory that much anymore. Very rarely do you hear it. And I listen to all of the news outlets, especially talk radio, as I drive. I listen to the conservative um, talk radio. I listen to, I guess you would call it the Democratic or liberal form of radio, just to listen to the different explanations and understanding of the current events. We moved from critical race theory to woke. Everything was woke. Everybody that was a white supremacist, who was a conservative, not to say that all conservatives are racist, but what you do find is that a lot of these Republican conservatives are racist. They do support white supremacy. They do support oppression, and they do support status quo. So then for quite a while, the term of the day, or the word of the day, was woke. Everything was woke. Now remember, critical race theory, woke, and the next word that I'm going to talk about all equate to the N word. They all equate to the N word, meaning it's used by them. They can't say the N word outright, so they replace it with something else. The N word was replaced with felon. Then from felon, it was replaced with critical race theory. From critical race theory, it was replaced with woke. Now, African Americans, especially the older generations, understood this term woke and what it meant. And I have another video on my page that I talk specifically about the definition and usage in the African American community of woke. So I won't get into it here. If you want to listen, you can just go to my channel and look at the videos. And the thumbnail of it says woke. So it's pretty easy to find. So woke was everything. You heard woke on all the conservative talk shows, all the conservative radio shows, academic writings by conservatives. You go to the different and various websites of conservative Republicans, and you would see the word woke plastered all over it. Before it was critical race theory, then it morphed to woke. Remember, they both have the same meaning black people and the N word. Well, woke sort of died out and has now been replaced with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So anything that black people, or I will use now, people of color or people from marginalized groups, anything that they use to elucidate, to clarify, to shed light on oppression, to shed light on the system and how it's working and who has and who hasn't, or who has and who doesn't have, is that the term of it is taken, sort of redefined, twisted and turned, tainted, given a false definition, and they really did that with critical race theory. And it takes away the actual power and purpose of the word or of the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion. Critical race theory, woke, things that we use as a people to help us to sort of, navigate the system and understand the system and how the system works, is commandeered, taken, switched, and given a false definition. And then that false definition is spread throughout media by the people who are in opposition. So be mindful of how they use these words. Be mindful. Well, how does that necessarily apply to Muslims? Because we know how that applies to black people. Well, they do the same thing with with words and with the Muslims. The word terrorist means Muslim to them. It doesn't mean domestic terrorists. It doesn't mean these mass shooters who are not Middle Eastern, who are not Muslim, who are not foreigners, who are not here illegally. It doesn't mean these, you know, born and bred non-people of color who do these mass shootings. Terrorist means Muslim. That's what it equates to, right? Now they use the term Hamas. Hamas means Muslim, all Muslims. Hamas means all Muslims. And it's applied if you say anything in support of the Palestinians. If you say anything in support of the Palestinians, well then, you know, by default, you are a supporter of Hamas. So from Hamas, it changed to, hold on a second, I'm having a brain lock here. So we went from terrorists to Hamas to anything that you say that is against Zionism. Not necessarily Jews, but Zionism and the terrorist state of Israel, you're called anti-Semitic. That term anti-Semitic is given a broad-based application. Anybody that speaks against oppression done by the state of Israel, done by Zionists, you're automatically labeled anti-Semitic. Even though that's not the actual definition of the word anti-Semitic. So my point is that words are taken, commandeered, redefined, and falsely applied in order to maintain the status quo, for them to be able to continue to do what they do, mislead the masses of Americans, black and white. These terms that these people hear and don't really understand and don't take the time to research misleads them. And it's done purposefully, and it's done behind an agenda. So be mindful of words, be mindful of how they're used, be mindful of who's using the words, and listen and understand dog whistle statements, dog whistle calls. Be mindful of that. When you hear especially these politicians when they talk, in the terms, the verbiage that they use, pay attention and see what they really mean. So again, this was just more of a reminder than it was new information. I'm sure most of this you guys already knew. I just wanted to remind you. So, barakallahu feekum. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.